All right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive into something a lot of people struggle with, and that's teenage motivation.
Mm.
Specifically, you shared some audio about your 15-year-old brother who's been having kind of rough time since moving from Brooklyn to LA with his older sister.
Right.
Um, and I think that's a pretty big culture shock, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, talk about a total 180, right? It's
Yep.
like going from this super fast-paced energy of New York City to a place that's much slower and where the focus shifts to things like entertainment and image.
Right. And to add on top of that, his sister is now his guardian.
Right.
And you can really hear in the audio you sent just the care in her voice, but she's also taken a pretty direct approach,
Mm.
almost like tough love, but with a side of support.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what she's doing is she's instinctively tapping into setting those clear expectations and boundaries.
Yeah.
That's actually a common thread that we see in motivational techniques, especially when it comes to teens.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about establishing a framework where actions have consequences, helping them understand that there's a link between the choices they make and the outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And she even ties this into finances.
Uh-huh.
Like, chores are equal to allowance, and she really makes a point of relating that spending back to hard work and saving.
Right.
Almost like she's building his financial literacy just from the ground up.
I think that's a really smart move. And actually, there's research from the University of Wisconsin that shows that teens who have strong financial skills,
Mm.
they're more likely to feel in control of their future,
Mm-hmm.
which can boost their overall motivation.
Okay, so before we even unpack any more of her strategies, I kind of want to define what we even mean by motivation in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting someone off the couch, right?
Right. Motivation is really that engine that drives us towards our goals, and it's powered by all these internal and external forces.
Okay.
So you have things like personality traits, your values, even just your mood on a given day.
Hmm.
But then you also have all these external cues like your environment, your relationships, cultural norms, all of that's mixed in.
So it's like a recipe with a ton of ingredients that we're always tweaking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, thinking about your brother and what we've discussed so far, what ingredients do you think are impacting his motivation right now?
Well, I mean, I think the drastic environmental change that he just went through has to be a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that alone would probably impact anyone's motivation.
Yeah.
Plus, he's at that age where, you're trying to figure out who you are and your identity. It's
What-
already a roller coaster,
Tell
even
me.
without uprooting your entire life.
He's trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing,
Yeah.
and he's trying to do it in a language that he's still learning.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that he might feel a little lost.
Now, one thing that the sister in the audio mentions is that she tries to use logic and real-life examples when talking to him.
Uh-huh.
She avoids using metaphors,
Yeah.
like no life is a journey speeches
Yeah.
here.
Well, there's actually reason for that. As teenagers' brains are developing, they really lean toward concrete thinking.
Okay.
Abstract concepts can be kind of hard for them to grasp.
Hmm.
So using those real-world examples and clear cause and effect explanations can be way more effective.
So she's really speaking his language.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it ties into this crucial point. Understanding a teen's developmental stage is so key to figuring out how to motivate them.
Mm-hmm.
Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles planning and impulse control,
Yeah.
it's still under construction.
He's trying to drive a car with the brakes not fully installed yet.
Exactly. And that's why a lot of those irrational teenage choices that we see are often just a reflection of their brain development, not necessarily defiance.
And probably why patience is key.
Absolutely. It's easy to forget what it was like to be a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
where everything, every emotion is amplified and everything feels like a life or death situation.
Oh, yeah. I definitely remember those days. But speaking of emotions, there's this part in the audio where the sister takes her brother back to her old apartment in Hollywood for a weekend.
Oh, yeah. The attempt to reconnect him with a faster pace and maybe trigger some good memories.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting she mentions wanting him to process his emotions, too.
Yeah, it's like she recognized that he needed something more than just advice or solutions. He
Yeah.
needed space to just feel what he was going through.
And that's a huge point. Sometimes the best way to support a teenager isn't by offering those immediate fixes,
Yeah.
but by just being present and validating their feelings.
Right. It makes you think of that same people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care,
That's so true.
especially with teens. Now, throughout the audio, the sister keeps emphasizing open communication and trust.
Yeah.
It's almost like a mantra for her.
Right. She even talks about active listening, really hearing her brother out before she offers any kind of solution.
Which is essential for building any strong relationship with a teenager.
Who often feels unheard and misunderstood.
Right.
It's about putting aside our adult lens and trying to see the world through their eyes.
And letting them know that those feelings are valid,
Yeah.
even if their choices aren't always the best.
Exactly. It's about separating the person from the action.
Yeah.
We could disapprove of a behavior without rejecting the individual.
And speaking of behavior, she also shared something really practical. She avoids using metaphors when talking to him.
Right.
Instead, she sticks to real-life examples and logical explanations.
That's not just good advice for talking to teens. It's actually backed by research.
Really?
Cognitive psychologists have found that because the teenage brain favors concrete thinking, metaphors and abstract concepts often just go right over their heads.
Oh, so it's like she's making sure that the message is actually getting through.
Exactly. She's speaking his language, using examples that he can relate to and understand.
Now, I noticed something else interesting in the audio.
Okay.
She talks about wanting to give her brother space to process his emotions, but not so much space that they become emotionally distant.
Right.
So there's a distinction there.
It's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between respecting their need for independence and maintaining a strong connection.
Yeah.
It's like walking a tightrope.
And she also talks about choosing the right moments for those heart-to-heart conversations. Not when things are heated, but when everyone's calm and receptive.
That's so important for creating a productive and meaningful exchange.
Yeah, and active listening came up again. Truly hearing what he has to say before offering advice or solutions.
That's the cornerstone of effective communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
Putting aside our own assumptions and biases and truly seeking to understand the other person's perspective.
Makes me think of that quote, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
A profound principle, and one that's especially relevant when interacting with teenagers.
Right?
They need to know that their thoughts and feelings are valid, even if we don't always agree with them.
Yeah, it's about validating their experience, even if we don't condone their behavior.
Exactly. We can disapprove of a choice without rejecting the individual who made it.
And she mentioned that avoiding metaphors thing again. She said she sticks to real-life examples and logical explanations.
That's a smart strategy.
Yeah.
As we discussed earlier, teenagers' brains are wired for concrete thinking.
Yeah.
Metaphors and abstract concepts often just go right over their heads.
Right, so it's almost like she's speaking their language.
Precisely. It's about meeting them where they are developmentally
Yeah.
and tailoring our communication style accordingly.
And finally, she emphasizes the importance of showing compassion.
Right.
And just being this really nurturing presence in his life.
That's perhaps the most essential element of all.
Yeah.
Teenagers, despite their prickly exteriors, are so sensitive and vulnerable.
Yeah.
They need to know that they're loved and accepted unconditionally, even when they make mistakes.
It's like creating this safe haven,
Yeah.
a space where they can truly just be themselves without that fear of judgment or rejection.
A space where they can grow and learn and become the amazing adults they're destined to be.
I know that's a beautiful thought to end on, but before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. You talked about how important it is for teenagers to feel a sense of autonomy and control over their lives.
It's a fundamental human need.
Right.
We all crave that sense of agency, that feeling that we have the power to influence our own destiny. And for teenagers who are constantly bombarded with messages about who they should be and what they should do,
Right.
that sense of autonomy can be especially elusive.
So how can we as parents or educators or really anyone who works with teens, how can we foster that sense of agency?
I think it starts with recognizing and respecting their individuality.
Okay.
Each teenager is unique with their own set of strengths, passions, and challenges. Instead of trying to fit them into a mold, we need to celebrate their differences and encourage them to explore their own paths.
So it's not about who we want them to be.
Exactly. It's about giving them the freedom to discover who they are.
And that means giving them opportunities to make their own choices.
Right.
Even if those choices aren't always what we would choose for them. So letting them fall down sometimes, even if it means, you know, scrape knees.
Within reason, of course.
Yeah.
But yes, allowing them to experience those natural consequences of their actions is an essential part of learning and growth.
Right.
It helps them develop resilience, problem-solving skills, and that sense of responsibility for their own lives.
It's like that saying, you can't protect them from the storm, but you can teach them how to build a boat.
perfect analogy.
Yeah, yeah.
It's about empowering them with the skills and confidence they need to navigate those inevitable challenges of life.
And that brings us to another crucial point. That balance of providing support and guidance, but without being controlling. Yes.
The fine art of letting go,
Yeah.
it can be one of the hardest things for parents and caregivers to do. But it's so essential for fostering that teenager sense of autonomy.
It's like walking a tightrope, right?
It is. It requires that delicate balance of trust, communication, and empathy.
Yeah.
We need to trust that our teenagers are capable of making good decisions, even if they stumble along the way.
Right.
We need to communicate openly and honestly,
Mm-hmm.
creating a space where they feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment.
Yeah.
And we need to approach their struggles with empathy, remembering what it was like to navigate the complexities of adolescence ourselves.
So it's not about giving them all the answers or shielding them from every difficulty.
Right.
But it's about equipping them with the tools and support they need to kind of find their own way.
Precisely. It's about fostering their independence, their resilience, and their self-reliance.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, we give them the greatest gift of all, the ability to create a fulfilling and meaningful life on their own terms.
Now, that's a powerful message. But I'm also hearing that it's okay for teenagers to struggle a bit. That making mistakes is part of the process.
Absolutely. It's through those stumbles and missteps that they learn the most valuable lessons.
Yeah.
Our job isn't to prevent them from falling,
Right.
but to be there to help them get back up, dust themselves off, and keep moving forward.
It's about building that resilience.
Exactly.
Mm.
And that's something that the sister in our audio seems to understand intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
She's not coddling her brother, but she's also not throwing him to the wolves.
Right.
She's providing a safety net while encouraging him to take risks and explore his own capabilities.
So she's finding that delicate balance.
Precisely. And that's what effective motivation often boils down to, creating an environment where teenagers feel safe enough to stumble, but supported enough to rise again.
Yeah, that's a concept I think we can all take to heart, whether we're dealing with teenagers or tackling challenges in our own lives.
It's a universal truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all need that balance of challenge and support to grow and thrive.
Okay, so we've talked about the sisters' approach, and you've shared some fascinating insights into the science of motivation. But I think the million-dollar question is it working?
That's where things get really interesting. You know, we can look at the principles she's applying, clear expectations, consequences, financial literacy, open communication, and so on,
Right.
and see that they align with a lot of research on what motivates teenagers.
Yeah.
But every teen is different,
Mm-hmm.
and what works for one might not work for another.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's so important to pay attention to the individual.
Yeah.
What are his unique needs and motivators?
Right.
What are his strengths and weaknesses?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we tailor our approach accordingly?
And that's where things get tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because teenagers, especially those going through major life changes, aren't always great at communicating what they need or want.
You're absolutely right. They're
Yeah.
still figuring things out, experimenting.
Right.
And their emotions can be all over the place.
So how do we crack the code?
Right.
How do we figure out what makes this particular teenager tick?
That's the million-dollar question. And while there's no easy answer, I think the sister in our audio gives us some valuable clues.
Oh, okay.
Remember how she talked about the importance of active listening?
Yes, she really stressed that.
And I think that's where we need to start, by truly listening to your brother, observing his behavior,
Uh-huh.
and paying attention to his reactions.
Okay.
You can start to piece together a better understanding of his inner world.
So it's almost like becoming a detective.
Exactly.
Searching for clues to his motivation.
And once you start to understand what makes him tick, you can start to tailor your approach accordingly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But sometimes even when we're listening closely, it can be hard to decipher what a teenager is really thinking or feeling.
Right.
They're not always the most articulate communicators, are they?
That's true. And that's where patience and observation come in. It's about paying attention to their nonverbal cues, their body language, their tone of voice. It's about noticing patterns in their behavior and trying to understand the underlying motivations.
So reading between the lines.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to ask questions.
Yeah.
Even if they seem obvious or silly.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes simply asking, how are you feeling?
Right.
Or what's on your mind?
Yeah.
Can open up a dialogue that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
And creating that safe space for them to open up.
Exactly. Because when a teenager feels heard and understood, they're more likely to trust us
Right.
and share their true thoughts and feelings.
And that's when the real breakthroughs can happen.
Absolutely. Because once we understand what's driving their behavior, we can start to address the root causes of their lack of motivation.
So instead of just treating the symptoms, we're addressing the underlying issue.
Precisely. And that's where the real magic happens.
Now, that's a powerful message. But I also want to acknowledge that not every teenager is going to be receptive to our attempts to understand them. Some might be resistant to opening up, or they might not even know how to articulate what they're feeling.
You're absolutely right. And that's where patience and persistence come in. It's about showing them that we're here for them no matter what.
Yeah.
It's about creating a safe and supportive environment where they feel comfortable expressing themselves, even if it takes time.
So building that trust over time.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that every teenager is different. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
What works for one might not work for another.
So being adaptable.
Exactly.
And responsive to their individual needs.
And it's about celebrating their successes no matter how small.
Yeah, because even small victories can build momentum.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that momentum can lead to bigger and better things.
Now, I know we're focusing on the challenges of motivating teenagers, but I think it's important to remember that they also have incredible strengths and potential.
Absolutely. Teenagers are full of energy, creativity, and idealism. They're capable of achieving amazing things when they're given the right support and encouragement.
So it's about focusing on their potential, not just their problems.
Exactly. And it's about believing in them even when they're struggling to believe in themselves.
Because sometimes our belief in them is all they need to start believing in themselves.
That's beautifully put. And I think it's a perfect reminder of why we do this work in the first place. It's not about fixing teenagers or controlling them. It's about empowering them to reach their full potential.
And that's a pretty incredible thing to be a part of.
It certainly is. Now, speaking of empowering teenagers, the sister in our audio shared another fascinating insight.
Okay.
She said she avoids using metaphors when talking to her brother.
Right, she mentioned that.
Instead, she sticks to real-life examples and logical explanations.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on how teenagers tend to think more concretely. But I'm curious to hear more about why she finds that approach so effective.
It's a clever tactic. And it aligns perfectly with what we know about adolescent brain development.
Yeah.
Remember how we talked about the prefrontal cortex still being under construction? Well, that also means that their abstract thinking abilities aren't fully developed yet.
So metaphors and figurative language can go right over their heads.
Exactly. They might hear the words,
Right.
but they might not grasp that underlying meaning or connect it to their own lives.
So instead of inspiring them, we might just be confusing them.
Precisely. And that's why using real-life examples and clear logical explanations can be so much more effective.
Yeah, it's like speaking their language.
Exactly. And when we speak their language, they're more likely to listen, understand, and be motivated to act.
Now, I know we're talking about avoiding metaphors, but I can't resist using one here.
Go for it.
It's like we're trying to build a bridge between our adult world and their teenage world.
Okay.
And to do that, we need to use materials that they can relate to and understand.
That's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights why it's so important to meet teenagers where they are developmentally speaking.
So instead of expecting them to climb up to our level, we need to come down to theirs.
Exactly. And that means being mindful of our language, our tone, and our approach. It means being patient, understanding, and willing to adapt our communication style to meet their needs.
Now, that's a challenge that I think a lot of adults struggle with. I think we get so used to communicating in a certain way that it's hard to break out of those habits.
I agree. It takes conscious effort and practice, but the rewards are well worth it.
Because when we can communicate effectively with teenagers, we can open up a whole new world of possibilities. We can build stronger relationships, foster their growth and development, and help them navigate the challenges of adolescence with confidence and resilience.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing gift to give, isn't it?
It certainly is. Now, speaking of gifts, the sister in our audio shared another gem.
Okay.
She said she makes a point of celebrating her brother's successes no matter how small.
That's such a powerful strategy.
Right.
It's about acknowledging their efforts and progress, even when they're not perfect.
Yeah, because sometimes those small victories are all it takes to boost their confidence and keep them moving forward.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that everyone learns and grows at their own pace. There's no need to compare them to others or pressure them to achieve unrealistic goals.
So it's about celebrating their individuality and appreciating their unique journey.
Absolutely. And it's about reminding them that they're loved and supported no matter what.
Now, I know we've been talking a lot about the sister's approach and the science of motivation, but I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What resonates with you most from what we discussed so far?
I think what strikes me the most is how much of this just comes down to simple human connection.
Yeah.
It's about building trust, showing empathy, and creating a safe space for teenagers to be themselves.
Yeah.
Even when they're messy and unpredictable.
It's about meeting them where they are.
Exactly.
Without judgment or expectations.
And when we do that, we can unlock their incredible potential.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought. And on that note, we'll wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into teenage motivation.
It's pretty remarkable how well this sister seems to get what her brother needs.
Yeah.
You know, she's not just reacting to his behavior. She's really trying to create this environment that supports his growth.
It's like she's building him a scaffolding.
Yeah.
Not a cage.
Right.
Giving him that structure, but also the freedom to figure things out on his own.
That's a great way to put it. And actually, it reminds me of a key principle in motivational interviewing,
Okay.
which is a counseling technique that focuses on collaboration and autonomy. And the whole idea is that people are more likely to change their behavior when they feel heard and respected,
Right.
not judged or coerced.
So it's not about lecturing them.
Exactly.
It's about guiding them towards their own solutions.
It's about helping them tap into their intrinsic motivation, that drive that comes from within.
And I think she also acknowledges that, teenagers, they're still figuring things out. They don't always have all the answers, and their emotions can be all over the place.
Well, that's a hallmark of adolescence, isn't it?
Right.
Time of intense exploration and experimentation, both emotionally and behaviorally. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for planning and impulse control,
Yeah.
it's still developing.
So they're kind of driving a car that's still under construction.
A vivid analogy.
Yeah.
And that's why patience and understanding are so crucial.
Right.
As adults, we have the benefit of hindsight and experience.
Yeah.
We can see the bigger picture in a way that teenagers often can't.
But instead of getting frustrated
Right.
with their seemingly irrational choices,
Yeah.
we need to remember what it was like to be in their shoes.
Absolutely. Recall the intensity of your own emotions as a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
The highs, the lows, the all-consuming drama of it all.
Everything felt so life or death back then.
It certainly did. And that's why creating a safe and supportive environment for teenagers to navigate those emotions is so important. They need adults who will listen without judgment,
Yeah.
offer guidance without control,
Right.
and celebrate their triumphs without diminishing their
That
struggles.
sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It can be, but the rewards are immense.
Yeah.
When we can help teenagers develop a strong sense of self-awareness, resilience, and intrinsic motivation,
All right.
we empower them to not only survive adolescence,
Yeah.
but thrive in adulthood.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Precisely.
Setting them up for success in all areas of their life.
It's about helping them become the best versions of themselves, whatever that may look like.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding patients, creating a safe space. Are there any specific strategies that she mentioned that we can learn from?
Absolutely. She talked about giving her brother space to process his emotion,
Yeah.
but not so much space that they become emotionally distant.
Right, so there's a distinction there.
It's an interesting distinction. It's like finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
between respecting their need for independence and maintaining that connection.
Right.
And it's not always easy to find that balance.
Yeah.
It takes careful observation and communication.
She also talks about choosing the right moments for those heart-to-heart conversations.
Yeah.
Not when things are heated, but when everyone's calm and receptive.
That's essential for creating a productive and meaningful exchange.
Right.
It's about setting the stage for open and honest communication.
And of course, she emphasizes active listening again, truly hearing what her brother has to say before offering any advice or solutions.
It's a cornerstone of any healthy relationship. But it's especially important with teenagers.
Right.
They need to know that their thoughts and feelings are valid,
Yeah.
even if we don't always agree with them.
So it's not about trying to fix them or their problems.
Exactly.
But validating their experience and helping them find their own solutions.
It's about empowering them to take ownership of their lives and their choices.
Thinking about this whole idea of autonomy and ownership, it reminds me of something else she mentioned.
Okay.
She talked about the importance of teaching her brother financial literacy.
Yes. That's a brilliant strategy. And it ties directly into fostering a sense of agency and control.
It's like she's giving him the tools to not only understand the value of money,
Right.
but also to make responsible decisions that'll shape his future.
Exactly. And research shows that teenagers who have strong financial skills are more likely to feel confident and capable in other areas of their lives as well.
So it's not just about balance in a checkbook.
Exactly.
It's about developing a mindset of responsibility and self-reliance.
And that's a mindset that can serve them well throughout their lives.
Now, thinking about all the different strategies we've discussed, I'm starting to see a common thread here.
Okay.
It's like they're all pieces of a larger puzzle,
Uh-huh.
all working together to create a more motivated and engaged teenager.
That's a great observation. And what's fascinating is that these pieces are often interconnected. For example, when a teenager feels heard and understood, they're more likely to be open to learning new skills like financial literacy.
Okay.
And when they develop a sense of agency and control over their finances, they're more likely to feel motivated and confident in other areas of their lives.
So it's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
Where each piece reinforces the others.
And that's why it's so important to take a holistic approach to motivating teenagers.
Yeah.
It's not about finding one magic solution, but about creating an environment that supports their growth and development on multiple levels.
So addressing their emotional needs, their cognitive development, and their practical skills all at the same time.
Precisely. And when we do that, we create a powerful foundation for them to thrive.
Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on the internal factors that influence motivation.
Right.
But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the external factors.
Okay.
How much of an impact does the environment play?
That's a great question. And it's a complex one because the environment can have both positive and negative effects on motivation.
Okay.
Think about it. If a teenager is surrounded by supportive adults who believe in them, they're more likely to feel motivated to succeed.
Right.
But if they're constantly being criticized or compared to others, it can have the opposite effect.
So it's about creating this culture of support and encouragement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the people in their immediate environment.
Right.
It's also about the messages they're receiving from the wider world.
So like from social media, movies, TV shows.
Exactly. Those influences can be incredibly powerful, especially during adolescence. When teenagers are trying to figure out who they are and where they fit in.
And those influences aren't always positive, are they?
Unfortunately not.
Right.
We live in a culture that often glorifies instant gratification, superficiality, and unrealistic beauty standards.
Right.
And those messages can be incredibly damaging to a teenager's self-esteem and motivation.
So how do we counteract those negative influences?
It's about being aware of them, first and foremost.
Okay.
And it's about having open and honest conversations with teenagers.
Yeah.
About the messages they're receiving and how those messages might be affecting them.
So it's not about shielding them from the world, but about equipping them to navigate it critically and consciously.
Exactly. And it's about helping them develop a strong sense of self-worth that's not dependent on external validation.
Now that's a powerful message. And it brings me back to something we discussed earlier about the importance of intrinsic motivation. It's not about chasing external rewards or approval, but about finding joy and purpose in the journey itself.
Beautifully put. And that's ultimately what we want for all teenagers.
Yeah.
To discover their passions, to pursue their dreams, and to live lives filled with purpose and meaning.
And to do that, they need to be intrinsically motivated, not just driven by external pressures or expectations.
And that's where all the strategies we've discussed come into play.
Right.
When we create an environment that fosters autonomy, mastery, and purpose, we unleash this powerful force within teenagers that can propel them to achieve amazing things.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, but before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the importance of understanding a teenager's developmental state.
Yes. That's a crucial point, and it's something that I think a lot of adults overlook. It's easy to forget that teenagers are not just miniature adults.
Right.
They're going through this period of rapid physical, emotional, and cognitive development.
Yeah.
And that development has a profound impact on their motivation.
So we can't just expect them to think and behave like we do.
Exactly. Their brains are literally wired differently.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to educate ourselves about adolescent development so that we can understand their behavior, communicate effectively with them, and support them in ways that are truly meaningful.
And to do that, we need to be willing to let go of some of our preconceived notions and assumptions about teenagers.
Absolutely. We need to approach them with curiosity, empathy, and a willingness to see the world through their eyes.
And to remember that they're not just teenagers, they're future adults.
Yeah.
And the way we treat them today will have a profound impact on who they become tomorrow.
That's a powerful reminder. And it brings me back to something we discussed earlier about the importance of creating a safe and supportive environment for teenagers.
Yes. Because when they feel safe and supported, they're more likely to take risks, try new things, and ultimately discover their true potential.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Helping teenagers become the best versions of themselves.
Now, speaking of becoming the best versions of themselves, the sister in our audio shared another fascinating insight.
Okay.
She talked about the importance of helping her brother find his passion.
Ah, yes. That's a key ingredient in the motivation equation.
Yeah.
When teenagers are passionate about something, they're more likely to be engaged, persistent, and resilient in the face of challenges.
So it's not just about getting them to do something.
Right.
It's about helping them find something that truly lights them up.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because sometimes teenagers don't even know what their passions are yet.
Right.
They might need some guidance and support to explore different options and discover what truly resonates with them.
So it's about creating opportunities for exploration and experimentation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's about being open to the possibility that their passions might not align with our own expectations or aspirations.
So letting go of our own agenda
Exactly.
and allowing them to find their own path.
And that could be a challenge for some adults.
Yeah.
But it's essential for fostering a teenager's sense of autonomy and ownership over their lives.
Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on the psychological aspects of motivation, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the physiological aspects. How much of an impact does our biology play?
That's a fascinating question. And it's one that researchers are still exploring. We know that hormones play a significant role in adolescent development and behavior, including motivation.
So those mood swings and emotional outbursts might not be entirely their fault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their bodies are undergoing a massive hormonal shift, which can impact their sleep patterns, their energy levels, their emotional regulation, and even their cognitive function.
So it's like they're battling a biological storm on top of everything else they're dealing with.
That's a great way to put it. And it's something that we need to be mindful of when interacting with teenagers.
So instead of getting frustrated with their behavior, we need to show compassion and understanding.
Precisely. And we need to create an environment that supports their physical and emotional well-being.
So that means making sure they're getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, and getting regular exercise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All of those things can have a positive impact on their mood, their energy levels, and their ability to focus and learn.
Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive, but before we move on to part 3, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
I'm all ears.
We've talked a lot about the challenges of motivating teenagers, but I think it's important to remember that they also have incredible strengths and potential. They're full of energy, creativity, and idealism, and they're capable of achieving amazing things when they're given the right support and encouragement.
I couldn't agree more. Teenagers are often underestimated and misunderstood.
Yeah.
But when we take the time to truly see them, to hear them, and to believe in them, we unleash this powerful force that can transform not only their lives, but the world around them.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into teenage motivation. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into teenage motivation.
Yeah, and after everything we've talked about, I'm feeling pretty optimistic.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's like we've been building this toolkit for understanding and empowering teens, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's time to address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
What if a teenager just seems completely resistant to all of this? What if they're just stuck?
That's a really valid concern, and I think it's important to remember that motivation, it's not like a switch we can just flip on and off.
Right.
It's a complex process that's influenced by so many different factors.
It can't force it.
Exactly. But what we can do is create the conditions that make motivation more likely to kind of flourish.
Okay.
Think of it like gardening.
All right.
You can't make a plant grow,
Yeah.
but you can provide the right soil, sunlight, and water
Right.
to give it the best chance to thrive.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what are some specific gardening tips we can use to cultivate motivation in a teenager who's resistant?
Well, I think the first thing is to really try to identify any underlying issues that might be contributing to their lack of motivation. So are they struggling with anxiety or depression? Are they feeling overwhelmed by academic pressure or social expectations?
So sometimes it's not just laziness.
Right.
There's something deeper going on.
Exactly. And until those underlying issues are addressed, simply telling them to try harder isn't going to be very effective.
Right.
It might even make things worse.
Okay, so let's say we've ruled out any major mental health concerns. What's next?
This is where I think understanding their individual values and interests comes in.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about intrinsic motivation?
Yeah.
We need to help them connect their efforts to something that they truly care about.
So if they're really into music,
Yeah,
maybe encourage them to join a band or, start composing their own songs.
exactly. It's about finding ways to align their goals with their values so they can see the purpose in their efforts.
Well, that makes sense. But what if they don't seem to have any strong interests or passions yet?
That's where I think exploration comes in.
Okay.
Encourage them to try new things, even if it's just for a short period. Sign them up for a cooking class,
Yeah.
a coding workshop, a volunteer opportunity,
Yeah.
anything that might spark their curiosity.
So we're helping them kind of expand their horizons and discover hidden talents.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And sometimes the act of just trying something new can be enough to break them out of a rut and rekindle their motivation.
Okay, so we've talked about addressing underlying issues, tapping into their values and interests, encouraging exploration. Any other gardening tips to keep in mind?
Absolutely. Here's one that I think often gets overlooked. Celebrate their small wins.
Okay.
Teenagers, they're constantly bombarded with these messages about achievement and perfection.
Right.
And that can be incredibly demotivating.
So instead of focusing on what they haven't accomplished, we need to acknowledge their efforts and their progress.
Exactly.
No matter how small.
Did they finally clean their room after weeks of nagging?
Yeah.
Did they manage to get through a tough homework assignment? Celebrate those moments.
Right. It's about reinforcing those positive behaviors and showing them that we believe in their ability to succeed.
Precisely. And those small wins can gradually build their confidence and motivate them to tackle even bigger challenges.
It's funny. What strikes me is how much of this really just comes down to shifting our own perspective.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing teenagers as lazy or defiant.
Right.
I think we need to see them as these complex individuals who are navigating a really challenging stage of life.
That's a profound insight. And when we approach them with empathy and understanding, it really changes the entire dynamic of the relationship.
It's like we're building a bridge instead of a wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that bridge can lead to a much more fulfilling and productive journey for both the teenager and the adult.
Now, I know we've talked a lot about the how-to of motivation, but I kind of want to touch on the why.
Okay.
Why is it so important for teenagers to be motivated in the first place?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is multifaceted. Right. On a practical level, motivation is essential for success in schoolwork relationships. But on a deeper level, motivation is about purpose, meaning, and fulfillment. It's about helping teenagers discover their passions, develop their talents, and contribute to the world in a meaningful way.
So it's not just about getting good grades or landing a good job.
Right.
It's about helping them live a life that matters.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe that nurturing a teenager's motivation is one of the most important things we can do as adults.
Yeah.
It's an investment in their future and in the future of our society as a whole.
And it all starts with understanding.
Yeah.
Understanding their developmental stage, their unique challenges, their hopes, and their dreams.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When we take the time to truly understand teenagers, we can create the conditions for motivation to really blossom.
Yeah.
We can guide them, support them, and empower them to become those amazing individuals they're meant to be.
Now, I want to bring it back to the listener who inspired this whole deep dive.
Okay.
She's clearly putting in a lot of effort to understand her brother and support him through this tough transition. What advice would you give her as she continues this journey?
Well, first, I would commend her for her commitment and compassion. She's clearly doing a lot of things right. And based on what she shared in the audio, she seems to have a really good grasp of the principles we've discussed today.
So she's on the right track.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I would encourage her to keep learning, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep listening to her brother.
Yeah.
Every teenager is different.
Right.
And what works for one might not work for another.
So it's about being adaptable and responsive to his individual needs.
Exactly. And it's about trust in the process. Motivation isn't a destination. It's a journey.
Yeah.
There will be ups and downs, setbacks and breakthroughs.
Right.
But with patience, persistence, and a whole lot of love,
Yeah.
she can help her brother find his way.
Now that's a powerful message to end on. So for our listener, and for anyone else out there who's trying to motivate a teenager, remember this. You're not alone. There are resources available, there are experts who can help, and there's a whole community of people out there who understand these challenges and rewards of this incredible journey.
Beautifully said. And remember, every step you take towards understanding and supporting a teenager is a step towards create a brighter future for us all.
So true. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into teenage motivation. We hope you found it insightful, engaging, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time, keep diving deep.